Have you been wondering if you have a food sensitivity problem, but have found yourself asking if a food sensitivity test is worth it? Then you're in the right place. I'm going to be answering that question in today's video, and it's not what you're expecting. So let's dive right on in. Hi, I'm Dr. Kelly, Doctor of Cause, Chiropractic, board certified in sports medicine, and specialized in clinical nutrition. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the little known challenges when it comes to food sensitivity testing. Then we'll discuss the most accurate way to know if you actually have a food sensitivity problem. Then we're going to go over the number one way to resolve your food sensitivities, and it's not an elimination diet. Let's get to it. All right, it's time to get into those little known challenges when it comes to food sensitivity testing. Now, first off, you've probably, if you've done some research into food sensitivity testing, have seen right off the get-go that it is costly. It is not the most affordable option to start trying to navigate if you have a food sensitivity issue or not. And you've probably seen that there are a number of different companies that are offering them. So how do you know which company is actually the best to be using? Well, that's a difficult thing too, because they're not all testing the same type of tests. When it comes to food sensitivity testing, there are several different, think of it as highway systems within your immune system that these reactions could be occurring in, okay? You don't need to know what those pathways are. Just know a lot of the food sensitivity tests that are available that are less expensive are only testing one of the highway systems. So if your type of sensitivity does not occur on this highway system, it's not going to be detected by that particular test. If it's occurring in one of the other highway systems, it won't be seen. So when it comes to the testing, you want something that is looking at all of the different highway systems that are available for the immune system. That gives you a more comprehensive approach to see, are you actually sensitive to that particular food or those particular foods? The other thing you'll notice is there are all kinds of different food options that you can choose from, like whether it's a 90 food sample or it's 120 or it's more than that. But sometimes what's tricky when it comes to a food sensitivity is that it's not necessarily the food as a whole, but different components of that food, or different ways that the food is actually processed, or how is the food sensitivity test company, like what are they comparing it to? So what you need to know about this is sometimes it's not apples to apples, okay? Can be very deceiving and really not give you the most accurate information. Now, if you've ever gone through to try to figure out if you have a gluten issue, part of the recommendation is to avoid gluten. And then it's like, well, if you're not having the gluten, your whole immune system may have quieted down enough that when you do the sensitivity test, it's hard to actually detect that there was a problem. So it can be very difficult is the bottom line. And it can be very costly, and none of them are created the same. So it creates a lot of confusion around where is the best avenue to start when it comes to food sensitivity testing. Something else that's challenging when it comes to food sensitivity testing is that your results can be very overwhelming. If your body is really angry right now and there's a lot of inflammation within your system, when you do a food sensitivity test, you may test sensitive to most things on that test. And now you're stuck with these results of like, I've got 50 different foods I can't eat, and most of those are things that I consume every single day. What in the world am I supposed to eat? I had this happen to me back when I was 15, and I discovered this alternative side of medicine. And ultimately, it was what led me to become a chiropractor after being really sick and passed around from one specialist to the next. Food sensitivity testing was one of the types of testing that was done on me. And I kid you not, I had like 1.5 pages of single-spaced, printed out number of foods that I could not eat. And most of them were things I were eating on a regular basis. My mom and I used to sit in the grocery store for hours on the floor reading ingredients of anything and everything that I used to eat. And we were so overwhelmed and frustrated. I was in high school. I was an athlete. I've got to be able to pack lunches to go with me that can't be refrigerated. Like, it made life really, really difficult. It was very frustrating. And I was so sick that I stuck to it. But if you're not really sick, but you're not feeling great and you think that this is part of the issue, and you end up with results that basically say everything you're eating right now, you're not able to, and then, oh, by the way, there's all these other foods you're not allowed to eat either. Do you think you're going to be able to stick to that? It's really hard. This is why I don't necessarily do food sensitivity testing right away with my patients, okay? So I'm curious, did any of you guys know that food sensitivity testing could be that complicated? Or have any of you actually had food sensitivity testing done and had that same kind of experience with the results being so many that it was overwhelming? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to know what your feedback and what your thoughts are on this topic so far. Okay, it's time to know what is the most accurate way for knowing if you probably have a food sensitivity problem. And it's not through the test. It's actually being able to understand what is some of the most common ways this will present in your system, okay? So I'm going to share with you what the most common symptoms are of food sensitivities. And before we do that, actually, I'd like to share with you a little bit of what is the difference between a food sensitivity and an actual allergy. Very simplest form, an allergy goes through one highway system in the immune system and it gives you an immediate reaction. And they're the classic reactions that we would basically know, symptom-wise, that are designated allergies. So itchy eyes, running eyes, scratchy throat, maybe even swelling in the throat if we go more towards an anaphylactic or a life-threatening type of a reaction, which generally people know what their allergies are from a very early age and not have to worry about figuring that out later in life, okay? Food sensitivities, the challenge with them is they are a delayed reaction. These reactions take place through different highway systems within the immune system that are slower to respond and slower to create symptoms. And also, the other thing that makes it very just hard to pinpoint is that the symptoms are nothing like classic allergy symptoms, okay? These symptoms, the most common ones, are gastrointestinal types of problems. So maybe gas or bloating after eating a meal, but maybe it's not until 2 days later because, again, the reaction is delayed. It can be up to 48 hours later. I've even seen research that cites it could show up 2 weeks later. So super difficult to figure out what are you actually reacting to if the reaction is delayed by days, okay? So we've talked about gastrointestinal types of symptoms, but it can also be things that you're just completely unaware of, like brain fog, lack of focus and concentration, memory issues, actual headaches, aches and pains throughout your whole entire body, skin lesions, so like your eczema. There's a lot of dermatologists that won't talk about food sensitivities as part of the underlying cause of eczema or even psoriasis, other types of rashes on the body, on the skin. But they're very related to what are you putting in your mouth, okay? Different types of autoimmune problems like Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, they all can have this underlying food sensitivity type of an issue. Some of the other areas that are really impacted are your sinuses. Or maybe you've been carrying around this extra 5 to 10 pounds, and no matter what you do, no matter how hard you work out or how little you eat, you can't get rid of it. That could be another sign that maybe you have a food sensitivity issue. Now, that's a lot of different symptoms, but those are the most common symptoms that would suggest you may be suffering from a food sensitivity problem. So now we got to figure out, what are you going to actually do with this? Now, before I get into the number one way to get rid of or get over your food sensitivities, and it's not an elimination diet, I just want to remind you to click that subscribe button down below. I am producing content regularly around food sensitivities, what are the best things that we need to be eating for overall health and well-being, and then also how do you achieve what I like to call total body mastery, and I don't want you to miss out. So click that subscribe button, hit the notifications, and you won't miss out on any future videos. All right, gang, what is the number one way to get over food sensitivities that does not include an elimination diet? Well, the answer is actually figuring out the underlying cause. So here's the thing. As I mentioned, when I was really sick and was being passed around the medical world, but then finally found alternative medicine, they did do food sensitivity testing on me. And remember, I was telling you, my list was like a mile long and it was incredibly overwhelming, but I was so sick and desperate to feel better, I was willing to do what it took for that. That doesn't have to be the way that it is for you. This is not where I start with the patients that I'm working with near and far. If you have a body that is not functioning at an optimal level, ultimately, part of what can happen is your threshold can lower. This threshold is part of what dictates what your body perceives as a stress. So if your threshold is lower, your body may think that more foods that you're consuming are offenders than what they really could be. Let's take, for example, say you have a gut that's totally inflamed and it's not working the way that it should. And in fact, maybe it's actually allowing things into your bloodstream that shouldn't be there. This is classically what's called leaky gut syndrome, which could be part of the reason why you're having food sensitivities. So here's the thing. If the gut's inflamed, no matter what you're putting into it, it's creating potentially more inflammation. That inflammation didn't start necessarily because of the foods that you're consuming. So part of what I do is try to figure out, why did that happen in the first place? It might be that there are certain foods you need to get rid of, foods that are great at promoting inflammation, or foods that are really hard for your digestive system to actually be able to handle. But it doesn't have to be a list that's a mile long. When we figure out what the underlying cause of why you're being sensitive to foods is, you don't have to have a huge list of things you can't eat. And you're working on the underlying cause, which ultimately will take care of itself, even if you don't avoid everything under the sun. Does that make sense? So what I do with my patients is I evaluate them as a whole, not just what foods might they be sensitive to. When I see them as a whole, I can see what organ systems are not behaving the way that they should, if they have inflammation or maybe a low-grade infection, if they have different nutrient imbalances and deficiencies, which could partly be why the gut's not behaving the way that it should, then we can support them properly for that. Down the road, if there's still something that's not seeming right, it's only down the road that I may actually do a food sensitivity test. I never start there with my patients. So ultimately, to answer the question of do I think that food sensitivity testing is worth it, it's not my starting place. It could be very valuable information down the road when we actually get the body doing what it's supposed to, if there's still seeming to be some sort of an offender that we can't pinpoint. But I don't start there because it's very overwhelming, and it's normally the result of an underlying problem. What I do is I work with figuring out what is the cause of that underlying problem. When you can deal with that, most everything else clears up. And that makes it much easier and less overwhelming on you. Okay, so here's the thing. If you're curious about how do I actually figure out what the underlying cause of my issue is that is allowing me to feel the way that I do and is having me think that I have a food sensitivity problem, then I want to invite you to my free 5-day health challenge where I explain to you exactly how to know what's causing your health challenges. All you need to do is look down in the description below. There's a link for you that will give you immediate access and you can start right away. That way you can know exactly what is causing your health problems right now and figure out what you need to do to start healing back from them. I appreciate you so much. Thanks for being here. I'll see you on a future video. God bless.